Hi, and it's been quite a bit of a delay since I did the last one. I need to get back into these. And what I want to talk about today is modern slavery after particularly reading a news report today. And I'm not talking about what's normally labelled modern slavery in the media, which is illegal, which is the idea that someone usually gets someone who might have learning difficulties or just be in a very vulnerable position and forces them to work 20 hours a day, beats them potentially, certainly doesn't pay them very much at all, if anything, takes away their rights. But when that's discovered by the authorities, the person is freed, the perpetrator is prosecuted and usually jailed. So that's one of those things. What I'm talking about is illegal modern slavery. In fact, more than it just being legal, it's slavery that is actually promoted by the state. And there's examples in both the US and the UK. Particularly, I'm going to talk about the UK. But an example in the US, for example, is the idea of jails. So a lot of jails in the United States are privately run. And what happens in there is the inmates are basically working, producing things, which can then be sold. It actually helps the United States stay very competitive with a lot of other countries who could otherwise afford very cheap labour because, again, very little rights for the people doing that work. And some people may say, well, of course, people are going to break the law and commit serious crimes. Then the fact that they're going to be put to work and being paid like 60 cents an hour for something that then that private company bosses are going to be profiting from, well, it sort of serves them right. But there's a wider picture to this. There's two things. First of all, you have to wonder to what extent some of these people should even be in the jails, especially when you consider a disproportionate number of them from poorer backgrounds, particularly in America with black backgrounds. But take, for example, a thing in the news this week, which baffled me, but then there are other things which also sound really weird as well. So there was a young man who was a criminal, fair enough. He and some friends attempted to burgle a home in America. And the police arrived and they fled. And a police officer shot one of the young men. Now, okay, in this country, we would think, they're fleeing. Yes, you'd want to capture them, sure, but not dead. Why are you shooting them when they're fleeing? But that's okay. The law as it stands in that particular state meant that officer acted within the law. No charge was brought against the police officer. Okay, fair enough. They've acted within their duty. But the strange thing is, someone has been prosecuted and jailed for the murder of that fleeing burglar. And it's one of the other burglars, one of their friends. This friend had no weapon. They weren't threatening anyone. They were fleeing along with everyone else. But the simple fact that they were part of the group that was shot by a police officer in the line of his duty meant that someone had to be charged with murder. And the law says that it has to be this lad. So this lad who went into to be a burglar, hasn't been prosecuted for the burglar, or he may have been as well, but specifically he's been jailed for a very, very, very long time, more than you would have done just for the burglary, if the police officer had not shot, for example, and he's gone down for murder. So, and there's various cases like this where you're just thinking, no. And you think to yourself, but this is mad. Surely you're not going to be putting people into jail if they don't really deserve it. I mean, what's the point of it? Well, it's the US, just like the UK, is a very capitalist society, and what makes sense in this situation is the people with the money want to make more money, and they will encourage lawmakers to set up the system in their favour. So yeah, and then the other thing is, so it's not just the fact that in these jails where you're working for like peanuts to produce products that then the owners, because it's a private industry, a lot of these jails are there, they're factories, they're just factories, are then making a profit. You've also got to think of what about the effects on the law-abiding citizens. And I don't just mean the ones who may have faced injustice and found themselves inside, because they're losing out on jobs as well. So the jobs that might have been done by the law-abiding citizenry are not, because they're being done more cheaply inside a jail, where you don't have to follow standard labour laws, you don't have to pay any sort of minimum wage. So coming on to the UK, so we have a system here. It's not to do with jails, but to do with apprenticeships. Now, there was the first instance I ever thought of institutionalized modern slavery in the UK was several years ago, probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And a scheme was set up by the government. And the whole impetus and the way it was presented in the media was it's a way of getting people back into work. So these people who haven't been working for a very long time, all right, they need experience. They're not going to be able to find a job. They don't know how to find a job. And it's always based on this assumption that there are more jobs than people. Okay, in some places there are, in some places there are not. Now, the idea was this: we're going to get employers to take them on to do something fairly menial just to get them into the cycle of working, and that'll benefit them. The reality of the situation, of course, is what they were saying to local employers is, you can have these people, you won't have to pay for them because they're getting benefits. They will be paid their benefits. So some of these people were working for, of course, then less than the minimum wage. In fact, really not for anything at all, because they're just getting their unemployment benefits. So they were still classed as unemployed, but they were still working. And they may have had extra expenses to the fact that they had to go to work. And this was pointed out as a form of modern slavery. And some, the media sort of at least backed that side of it to the point where some of those companies then stopped using that. Because again, it's a double thing. You may think to yourself, well, people who are unemployed and on benefits should, if it's possible, do some work. But again, what we're forgetting is what that means is that, let's say you've got a bakery and they use two unemployed people to do some low-skill job, something that doesn't require much training. That means that there's two what would have been jobs for that bakery that no longer exist. So you're actually putting two more people onto the unemployment figures, as well as getting that labour cheap to basically nothing, which again, slave labour. And these people have got no say in the matter because, of course, they can't refuse to do it. So that sort of died a little bit of a death because it was very unpopular and people saw it for what it was. But now there's another situation just arisen to do with apprenticeships in this country. Now, what an apprenticeship should be is you are being trained to do a skilled job. Now, where I am, for example, we have a fairly large steelworks. We send off, I have several of my students who go off and take apprenticeships up with that company. And they're taught the skills of engineering, for example, and they will end up on a wage that's well above the national average. They will actually be going into a good career. And they'll be learning advanced skills. Now, that's what an apprenticeship should be. It's getting you ready for a skilled job. It doesn't require university training, but you need to learn on the job, and you'll be taught by people who've been doing this job for a long time. And it's structured, and it's a mix of you working under supervision and being taught in a structured educational environment. And you start off on a lowish wage, but then you sort of move up the scale, and eventually you're on a very good wage within a few years. However, what has been happening in the UK is there have been a number of companies who have been advertising low-skilled jobs as apprenticeships. In other words, jobs that don't require much training at all. For example, KFC were having one, and they were advertising it as this, we're going to be teaching you this and this and this. But what it actually came down to is it's just someone who, cooks the fries and maybe greets customers at the front of house. Doesn't require a lot of training, that job. That job, when it's a job for someone, requires very little training. And yet they're making a whole apprenticeship out of it. An apprenticeship is supposed to last for several years. It's supposed to be several years of training because you're learning a skilled job. And of course, so what's the benefit for the company in doing this? Because there's subsidies. The company is making money out of it. They also, because it's an apprenticeship, don't have to pay the minimum wage. So there's that element to it as well, because the idea of an apprenticeship is you're actually not working for the full amount of hours you've got to commit, because some of that is educational time. But of course, how much education really is there in how to throw a load of frozen chips into a basket and dunk it in oil? And then it's not just KFC, I mentioned that one, there's other ones as well, of course. All these companies that will benefit from having cheaper labour are using it to bypass normal labour laws by, repackaging someone who sweeps a floor as an apprentice. Oh, it's going to take you 3 years to train you how to push a sweeping brush. And again, this is the sort of thing that just is constantly happening. That you see, we think that we live in an equitable society. We think, for example, and in this particular case, slavery has been abolished. It was abolished a long time ago, and both Britain and America, like to stand tall, as have been people who are very anti-slavery, of course, because we've both had our various input on it. We were far too much on the supply side of it, and it's not true. It's not true at all. In fact, we're actually both countries encouraging it and forcing a lot of people into modern slavery. So anyway, there's my little say on that. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And until next time, when I come up with another thing to gripe about, I'll see you later.